For the next 10 months, Azuku began to harness this new power of his. He explored the weaknesses and strengths of the Red Lantern power. He needed to be strong if he ever wanted to rebuild this powerful lantern core. He was able to manage his rage pretty well during this time of self-isolation and practice making light constructs. He was pretty decent in it. He could make weapons out of these constructs, and he was also able to fly. This was something he picked up on from day one. It was a useful ability, even in a world full of superpowered beings. Having the power to fly was always a cut above the rest. He had this weird ability to spew blood out of his mouth, but he wasn't even sure if this was even truly blood because it was like acid to whatever it encountered. It quickly burned through whatever they touched besides himself. It would have been inconvenient if that wasn't the case. He could use that as a surprise attack against certain opponents in a close combat battle. This wasn't even the only use of this plasmoid blood either. He could actually use them as portals, although he didn't know what the limit was. He discovered this ability by accident where he tripped over himself one day and ended up falling in a pool of his own acidic blood. It didn't stop there though. He fell through headfirst and it emitted this red light before engulfing him, and he stumbled out the other side to see he was in a familiar area. He looked around and realized he was in the same tunnel that he first gained those lantern powers. This was early on though. Just a week after becoming a Red Lantern, he practiced using this ability pretty often, considering how convenient it was, plus he needed food. The planet wasn't all that hospitable for life, unfortunately, but Azuku had plans for this base of operations. 10 months passed, and Izuku developed fairly well. He grew over those 10 months to be around 5'9", and his muscle growth was pretty decent as well. He was still on the slimmer side, but his muscle definition was very apparent. Izuku was competent in his abilities, enough to say that he was close to mastering the usage of some. He managed to produce 10 Red Lantern rings from the power battery and program them to find strong individuals with great range in their hearts. He also set them for Earth too, simply due to his own preferences. Sure, the Red Lanterns were created by an alien, but he didn't know how other alien races would react to becoming Red Lanterns and how they'd feel about him being their leader. It was a risk with Earth too, but he would at least stand a better chance against them. Azuku went through one of his blood portals and appeared back at the tunnel where the Sludgeville incident happened. He spewed some more blood so it would still stay in effect even after a certain amount of time passed. He wanted to take precautions when it came on to things like this. He didn't have much to do at the time, so he wanted to try and get in contact with his mother. Thankfully, she still had the same address. When he knocked at the door and he saw the confused look on his mother's face, he realized she didn't recognize him, especially with all of the different features. "Mom, it's Izuku," he said. There was one little thing about Izuku that didn't change, and that was his voice. He was grateful for that. Inko recognized her son's voice immediately and wrapped her arms around him. She began interrogating him with a series of questions about where he's been, why does he look so different, where did he get these clothes from, and a whole lot of other questions. Izuku tried answering as much as possible within the short frame of time she was giving him. "So, you mean to tell me that this red ring came out of nowhere, inserted itself around one of your fingers, gave you several powers, and now you're going to be recruiting a team of individuals to carry on some sort of legacy you never heard about until just under a year ago? Inko asked. Izuku nodded. I'm going to be scheduling a meeting with your doctor, Izuku, Inko stated. Izuku knew it sounded absurd. Even when it happened to him, he had to slap himself in order to make sure he wasn't just dreaming or something. Sure enough, he wasn't, but his mother thought he was a lunatic, so he decided to show her that he wasn't crazy. He began floating upwards and created a red construct of a toy All Might. This caught Inko's attention, and she dropped her phone after seeing this. Izuku. He was telling the truth. Inko couldn't believe her eyes. Izuku wanted to test his powers some more while he was down on Earth and began messing around. He remembered signing up for Yui's hero course, and if he was correct, a week from now, the Yui entrance exams would be held. He wouldn't miss out on this opportunity whatsoever. He wanted to see how he stacked up against the others, especially Bakugo. He looked back at his mother and informed her of what he would be doing. There were a couple of issues with this though, the first being the fact he was considered missing for the last several months. Second, he was almost completely unrecognizable. Izuku knew what to do about those issues though. He formed a fist and pointed the ring towards himself. A beam of energy shot out from the ring and began to reconstruct Izuku's body to where he looked similar to how he was before becoming a Red Lantern. Inko was surprised to see how easily Izuku was able to do that. What couldn't this boy do? I don't understand though. Why didn't you use that from the very beginning when you were knocking at the door? Inko asked. Izuku was silent for a second before answering. I didn't really think much about that ability until you mentioned it. Inko face palmed but smiled and hugged her son. She was just happy he was home and safe. For the next week, she worked with the police department to confirm that her son was no longer missing. Not only that, but also that he apparently had this sort of light manipulation quirk. She went to the quirk doctors for this and wrote down that Izuku was a late bloomer. It was unusual, but there were weirder cases. There was something odd about her son though. Izuku always had an issue with showing his emotions, but now it was as if he was a completely different person. He bought a punching bag just a day after he arrived back home and started using it regularly. It was as if he was releasing pent-up frustrations. When it came to spending time with her, Izuku was much more tense. His leg would always bounce while sitting down. She didn't know what was wrong. Before they knew it, it was time for the UA entrance exams. Inko wished Izuku the best for the exams and he smiled at her. Thanks, Mom, was what he said before he left. Izuku flew over to UA. He didn't care if it was against the law, honestly. There were probably like 7 laws he broke daily. He and a lot of other people in Japan. It wasn't as if this was harming anyone anyways. He landed at UA's entrance gates while everyone else was walking in. They were surprised to see him just appear like that. It wasn't every day that someone would come crashing down on a school entrance. A boy with blue hair and glasses tried talking down to Izuku, explaining how it's not appropriate to be using their quirk in public. But Izuku ignored everything he had to say. He walked into the building and exhaled heavily. That kid was annoying. He unfortunately had to sit next to Bakugo. Just being in close proximity to him made his anger spike. He could feel Bakugo's anger as well, anger at the fact that Zuko was even here to begin with. He always wanted to be number one, but that wouldn't happen here. Not at all now that he had his own power. Power that made Bakugo's explosions look pathetic in comparison. He suppressed his anger for now, though. He began fiddling with his fingers in order to help, and he listened all throughout President Mike's speech until the blue-headed boy from earlier interrupted the hero, talking about the fact there were 4 bots printed on the paper and not just 3. Azuku groaned internally, but he supposed he couldn't be too mad at him. He brought up a good point. What was with the 4 robots printed on the paper? President Mike explained the purpose of the 4th robot being that they were more of an obstacle that competitors would prefer to run away from rather than fight. It wasn't necessarily that they had to run, but it was more a more viable option than actually fighting the Titan of a robot. Izuku smirked. He saw this as a sort of challenge that he was ready to accept. Everyone left to take the written and physical part of the exams. The written part was pretty easy overall. Not much to really say there. He got a B+ there. It was pretty boring, but Izuku was hyped for the physical exams. He could finally get to test out his abilities and see how he stacked up against everyone else. He stood in the position of a wild animal ready to pounce on their prey. As soon as President Mike gave the go for them to head into the arena, Izuku leaped into action, quickly destroying the very first robot he saw. A minute into the exam, and almost all of the robots were already destroyed. Everyone, and when I say everyone, I mean everyone. Everyone just looked at the carnage Izuku displayed. They were almost too afraid to move any further. He gave off a large wave of killing intent, and many were wondering if he was really trying to become a hero. They watched him punch through a couple of robots with his bare hands, create swords to slice down others, and simply blast away at others with this red light that came from one of his fists. They could have even sworn the boy vomited a huge chunk of blood at one point, but it appeared to be so corrosive that the robots it hit melted on sight. Teachers were also watching Izuku's wild display of power. He was racking up points fast, even faster than the explosive blonde. A minute in and he already had around 30 points. 5 minutes passed, and he was far ahead of most of the records set by some of the greatest heroes who attended UA. He had around 180 points in total at that point, and the boy didn't show any signs of slowing down. They lost it when they saw the boy fly up high into the sky and start shooting down what appeared to be lasers of some sort at pretty much every other remaining robot within the vicinity. 500 points within 6 minutes of the exam. That was unheard of. Not even All Might was able to get that many points, and it didn't appear the boy was tired either. This was an unprecedented event. Nezu appeared on an intercom and addressed the fact that those within Block C, Izuku's area, would have to return back to the stadium until further notice, as the robots there were all destroyed. The teachers saw everything and knew that most of the student entry candidates were unable to scrap together any points, hence why they were going to bring in their spare robots. UA always came prepared, especially for cases like this. For this one, although they never thought that they would ever arrive when someone could just wipe out an arena of robots so huge as that one. Nezu was still curious about Izuku's strength and wanted to give him one last little test. He pressed a big red button meant to initiate the activation of the 0 pointer. Meanwhile, Izuku flew down and landed on the ground. He was pretty pleased with himself, honestly. He was expecting more of a fight from these robots, but being able to get that much work done compensated for his disappointment in how easy they were to destroy. Izuku was one of the last people to reach back down to the entrance gate, and when he, uh, well, when he felt light vibrations heading his way, he turned around to see a hulking behemoth of a robot destroying the buildings. Izuku smiled at this and began running towards the robot. Those who were with him tried to pull him back, thinking he had some sort of death wish, but their efforts were fruitless in the end. Izuku flew high into the sky once again and shot a simple light beam at the robot. The most it did was simply reflect off of one of its eyes. Izuku's smile turned into a wide, toothy grin. This was going to be fun. Izuku created a giant construct of All Might, which made every teacher's eyes bulge out. This display of power was amazing. It wasn't as if it was just some giant hologram of All Might either. There was weight behind it. Each of this boy's constructs had mass, and this one was no exception, as it was easily able to punch the 0 pointer and knock its head clean off. The construct then punched through the robot's chest and kicked it down before ripping off their arms. They beat the robot with their own arms for 30 seconds straight before Izuku got bored of it and flew back to the entrance gate to walk through. He didn't need to stay, unlike the others, so he took his leave. He knew he was a shoo-in for UA. The teachers, they just stared in awe. They just couldn't believe that there was somebody so powerful among their roster of potential students. Even Nezu was impressed. And that was saying something. But yeah, that's all I have for right now.